So the talk that I'm going to give is really supposed to be an industry perspective on the AQUA-FAANG project. And the way I want to treat this is just to really give an overview of what we're doing in applied breeding at the moment, and then just set that against some of the key AQUA-FAANG deliverables and what we might expect to see in the future. So as Dan says, this is based on the industry white paper, but it is also very much a perspective from Select as a business. So just to set the scene, this shows a summary of the European aquaculture sector. What you can see over the last 20 years has been incredibly strong growth, about 70% since 2000. And you can also see this it's largely driven by Atlantic salmon production. But that's not the whole story. And certainly if you look within different regions, you can see that there's been very strong growth in other species as well. And the other thing to point out is that it's really highly diverse in terms of species. So we think there's around about 70 species that are grown at any sort of scale. And this means that the breeding in these niche species tends to be quite decentralized. It's often run by relatively small producers managing their own broodstock. So the uptake of technology across the sector is fairly variable, and we do have to account for that when we're talking about impact across the sector. So Rachel's already given an introduction to Select. So we're a specialist genetic service provider. We're based in St Andrews, about an hour north of here. But we work in breeding programs around the world. These species along the bottom show some of the key ones we work in, but this is by no means exhaustive. Most of our business is in breeding program management, but we also offer other genetic and laboratory services. So who do we work with? So really we work with businesses across the aquaculture sector. So all the way from very large broodstock distribution companies right the way down to small and medium-sized enterprises who are running their own breeding program for their own production needs, often at fairly modest volumes. So as you can see, the use of technology is fairly variable. In most of the breeding programs that we run, we tend to be using genetic markers purely for parentage reconstruction. And all of the breeding value estimation is just using pedigree-based approaches. We run some programs where we're using marker-assisted selection for particular traits that are a commercial priority for these customers. And we also run a number of genomic prediction programs. So this is both using full high-density genotyping, but also much smaller panels for imputation. Rachel talked about the new genotyping technologies we're introducing, so we do expect this number to grow fairly substantially over the next year or two. If you look at the traits that our customers are interested in, as you might expect, it's primarily focused on growth. That's what drives revenue for the companies. But we do have this long tail of secondary traits that are also commercial priorities for our customers. And you can see disease resistance is right up there, and obviously this was one of the rationales behind the AQUA-FAANG project, and it is something that's important in the industry. So again, I don't need to go through these in too much detail. We have a range of genotyping technologies. Most of them are done using an amplicon sequencing approach, so between 100 and 300 SNPs, and this is a perfect size for doing parentage and also for doing imputation up to higher density. But we do have this 5K technology that we have available. And I think the other point I just wanted to make about this is that both of these are incredibly flexible technologies. So unlike an array, for example, you can modify these for a specific population or for particular traits or functional markers. So it's as Rachel demonstrated, it's a really great technology if you have particular variants that you're keen to include in your genotyping platform. So this slide here just shows a typical aquaculture breeding cycle. So normally what we'll see is we'll have a distinct nucleus group. So this will contain all of the families and all of the genetic variation from the population. And this will tend to be kept somewhere in a biosecure facility to ensure that you get good levels of survival and to ease the actual broodstock operations. What this does mean is the traits that you measure in these fish are not particularly relevant to production conditions. So what we have to do is maintain separate sentinel groups that are closely related to the nucleus, and they'll be grown under production-like conditions so that you can then estimate the breeding values for the animals in the nucleus and produce the next generation either by targeted crossing where you can or by group configurations in some species like sea bass and sea bream. So I said that one of the key traits is disease resistance, and this is just a summary of how we currently breed for it. So typically, disease challenge trials will take place on a separate sentinel group. In most cases, these will be full siblings of the selection candidates, so we can generate quite high prediction accuracies. But there is quite a big cost associated with maintaining these groups, all of the phenotyping facilities that you need, and also animal welfare concerns about using animals in disease challenge trials. So disease resistance is one of these traits where genomic selection does have quite a lot to offer. So again, this is just a sort of simulated example of the figure that we've seen before. So this is the kind of exercise that we would do when we're designing a genotyping strategy. And you can see that, that once we go above 5,000 SNPs or so, we don't get any improvements in prediction accuracy for our candidates. We've validated this in real breeding programs, so using genomic prediction methods, we can get substantially improved accuracies for disease challenge trials, both in the quantitative days to death trait and also mortality. And this difference is biggest in the candidate groups, which is obviously where it's most important to have the high prediction accuracy. So, yeah, again, a familiar figure. But this really just shows a summary of the AQUA-FAANG deliverables and some of the routes that we see to the commercial exploitation of this knowledge. So, we've heard a huge amount about all of the various data sets and all of the functional annotations. And it's an incredibly rich data resource, and it's also publicly available. So it should maximize the access to both researchers and also to industry. We've already started to see some of the cases where we can see a direct link to commercial application. But there are really three main areas where it has the potential to increase rates of genetic gain. So new genetic tools, new approaches to doing genomic selection that we've heard a lot about this morning, and also genome editing. And really that's kind of not where we are as a company at the moment, so I'll just talk a little bit about these two for the last bit of the talk. So currently when we're doing marker-assisted selection, we typically take markers from published studies. What you can often find is that because these are linked rather than functional or causal, the effectiveness can be quite specific to populations. So very often you'll find that they work in one and not in another. We've had a really nice case study from the talk that Robert and Rachel gave about how we can now really quickly go from these associations to the underlying functional genetics, and also produce very quickly new genetic tools that prioritize those functional variants. And whilst these still have to be validated on disease data, we do expect that these will show significant improvements in performance, both across populations, but also between generations as well. Again, new approaches to genomic prediction. This is perhaps more of an open question, although hopefully we're going to hear some more answers to this question soon. But we do have evidence from, for example, cattle, where prioritizing functional genomic information in the design of your SNP panel and in the analysis, so these are the yellow bars here, gives you increased performance both across populations and within a population as well. So the question for me is how is this going to translate into aquaculture breeding programs? I mean, aquaculture breeding programs do look very different. And I think just the final point that I want to make is that we also have to consider this in an economic context as well. So if you make these investments in technology, how does it translate into a return on investment for the company? We could potentially reduce the amount of phenotyping that carries much lower costs with it. But does that affect your requirement for genotyping, the density of the markers? And these, I think, are kind of interesting questions that need to be answered. So this is just the final point I want to make, that as a breeding company, you have choices about where you spend money. your rate of genetic gain can be summarized by the breeder's equation. And the important point is that the prediction accuracy is only one component of this. There are other modifications we can make. We can change number of families, number of candidates that we're evaluating. We can look at different phenotyping technologies, and those can affect prediction or the accuracy of your selection as well. And the other thing is that in aquaculture breeding programs, you tend to often have fairly narrow, closed populations. So the effective management of genetic diversity and inbreeding within your population is also really important. And the final point is that when you consider genetic gain in a commercial program, you have to think of this in terms of dollars per year rather than units of traits. And understanding how the genetics interacts with the commercial realities is also really important. So the way that we typically do that at Select is we combine high-resolution genetic simulations and layer on top of those bioeconomic models as well. And so this is just an example here where you can see all of the breeding program costs or all of the company costs below the x-axis and then the revenues above. And you can work out the profit based on those. And again, the prediction accuracy is only one component of that. The economics really do matter as well. Okay, so just to finish off, I think the AQUA-FAANG project has been incredible in terms of the depth of the data that it's generated, and also what we've seen, some of the potential applications that are happening now and also coming along in the future. So I think from my point of view, what I'm really interested to know is how changing your approach to genomic selection is going to affect the way in which the breeding programs are designed, and particularly how that's going to affect the economics. And how we put this functional genomic information into the kind of decision-making tools that are needed if you want the technology to be widely adopted. So I'll finish there, and if there are any questions, thank you.